Hello and welcome back. Today, I'm going all primeval on your ass. Nah, never seen that again. Hello, welcome back to my world of stuff. My name is Paul Mount. If you are new here, because you've seen Primeval and you remember Primeval and you want to hear me talking about it, why not think about liking and subscribing to the channel? All you have to do is to click that subscribe thing there, or you can click on that with your phone. It will subscribe you to the channel. Yes, I'm back. I am back after pretty much a week off making videos, which wasn't intentional. As some of you may know, I did try to keep you in the loop by putting posts in the community section. I've gone down with a nasty lurgy over the last few days, man flu, which is of course the worst type of flu, as I think you all agree, which I think I picked up last Wednesday. I went to the theatre at Varlings in Cardiff to see Stuart Lee, the cult comedian. Packed crowd, and I think I probably picked up something that was floating around there. And I had a bit of a chest infection, a bit of a cold, cough, sneeze, all that sort of stuff. I am quite susceptible to chest infections, unfortunately. And I get a cold and a cough and a sneeze, and then it goes down on my chest. You can tell my voice is still a little bit hoarse. Steady girls. But I'm over it now. I'm getting over it. I feel better. I had a few days when I felt really rough, and all I was doing was coughing. I couldn't sleep. Couldn't really focus on doing videos and things. Although I did manage to catch up on some TV, which is one of the reasons I'm doing this video today. But a big thank you to those of you who left messages of commiseration and get well soon messages. Much appreciated. But I am back. I've got some interesting videos, I think, hopefully coming up in the next week or so. There'll be another physical media update coming up very soon, another collector's corner. I've had a few new bits and pieces that you might be interested in, plus reviews and all the usual odds and sods. But today, my good friend, I'm taking you back to 2007, when ITV launched its rival to Doctor Who. It wasn't actually considered a rival to Doctor Who, really, but it was a show that ITV was quite keen to commission following the success of the rebooted Doctor Who in 2005. You may remember when Doctor Who came back, a lot of skeptics and TV bigwigs and industry types predicted that the show wouldn't be a hit because that family audience on a Saturday night was no longer there. The audience was there for the shiny floor light entertainment shows, but the idea of a family, generations of family, coming together as a communal experience to watch a drama series just seemed old hat. It seemed like something from the 70s, a tradition that had died out. Mainly because nobody had done it, nobody had tried it. I think Doctor Who worked because of its history. It was a known title. People had fond memories of it, and generationally, parents, grandparents were able to say to their kids, grandkids, this was great in my day, come and watch Doctor Who, you'll really enjoy it. Unfortunately, those first few years of Doctor Who were very good, and it captured a large audience which completely confounded everybody in the industry, including the people who made it, I think. So not unnaturally, ITV, having seen the success of the show, were quite keen, if they could, to develop something in the same genre, if not exactly like Doctor Who, because Doctor Who as a format is unique and something that can't really be replicated, but it is obviously possible to work within the same genre. So on the 10th of February 2007, Primeval aired on ITV on Saturday nights. Now the history of the series is quite interesting because it was created by Tim Haines and Adrian Hodges. Tim Haines in particular had made his name, or became well known in the late 1990s when he was behind the very, very popular wildlife documentary series Walking with Dinosaurs, which used then cutting-edge TV CGI techniques coupled with natural history footage to create a story of what life would have been like for the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. That original Walking with Dinosaurs series was a massive hit. It topped the ratings most weeks when it was screened, and it led to several spin-offs. I think there was a film a few years ago, and there were variations on it. There was a recent Walking with Dinosaurs series, which was a little bit twee and didn't have the same impact and sort of sank without trace. But Tim Haines created a successful series for the BBC that sold internationally, was a massive hit, and he created his own production company called Impossible Pictures. And he had come up with an idea for a series that was originally called Cutter's Bestiary, which was what Primeval eventually became. He wanted to use that technology that had been championed in Walking with Dinosaurs and use it in a continuing returnable drama series. He created the format and the formula and some ideas for characters and storylines, pitched it to the BBC. BBC, with Doctor Who on their hands, weren't really looking for another genre show, particularly not one which they felt was a bit too similar to Doctor Who. I don't think I necessarily agree with that. I don't think there's much connection between Primeval and Doctor Who apart from the fact that they've both got monsters in them. However, he went to Nick Elliott, who I think was the commissioning editor for drama at ITV at the time, who really liked the scripts, really liked the idea, was quite keen to put a show onto ITV that had the flavour of Doctor Who and could perhaps replicate Doctor Who's success or mirror it in some way. So the show was commissioned and went into production and came to the screens in February 2007. So what is Primeval all about? Well, it's a really interesting idea, and I will say that while I've been ill over the last few days, I watched the first season again. And the thing about Primeval, it isn't a show that, although people watched it at the time and enjoyed it and had decent viewing figures for its first couple of seasons, it isn't a show which really compelled people to go back to it. I think with Doctor Who, because of the variety of storylines and characters and the visual look of it, it is a show that you can revisit and go back to and watch again, because you always find new things in it, new bits and pieces. And of course, back in those early days of the reboot of Doctor Who, it was so brilliantly written. It was a delight to marvel in the great dialogue and the characters and the really clever plotting. Ah, those days. Primeval, however, was a one-time watch, and I watched it when it was on and really enjoyed it, but there was nothing about it that made me want to go back to it. So I've only ever seen every episode of Primeval. I've seen them all. I've only ever watched them once because nothing compelled me to go back. I actually picked up the DVDs of the first couple of series. I don't think I ever watched, in fact I'm pretty certain I never watched any of the episodes, because this was at the time when DVD was the big thing and you picked up all these things because you had a collection of TV programs, whether you were a mad fan or not. So rewatching the first season this last week, over the last 5 days or so, has been actually quite a revelation because I really enjoyed it. I thought it was good fun, really well put together, very exciting, directed with real energy, with some scripts that were more sophisticated in terms of the character dynamics than I had remembered, and managed to exploit the potential of an idea which, unfortunately at times, was handled in a slightly pedestrian and unimaginative fashion. If you've never seen the series, then Primeval is the story of a team of scientists who are tasked with investigating the appearance of temporal anomalies across the United Kingdom, through which prehistoric and futuristic creatures enter the present. It starts off really well with a man being stalked by what appears to be some sort of T-Rexy type dinosaur through the car park of an Asda supermarket. We then flash forward a few years and we meet our main characters. Now the show has a really interesting cast of characters. The show's lead character was Nick Cutter, played by Scottish character actor Douglas Henshall. I wasn't familiar with Douglas's work at the time of the series. He was an actor who'd done a lot of work on theatre and film and TV, but he wasn't identified with one particular role. I don't think he'd attached himself to one particular project for a long period, and he just hadn't crossed my radar. Nick is a dour Scots professor in his early 40s who heads up this team of scientists who, several years after the events of the pre-title sequence, are aware of these anomalies through which strange and exotic creatures pass into the present. And he is a dedicated scientist who wants to find out what's caused these anomalies. He also appears to be a widow, as his wife Helen disappeared several years earlier. His assistant is Stephen Hart, played by James Murray. Also on his team is Abby Maitland, played by former S-Club songstress Hannah Spearrett. She's an expert in lizards and insects and so on. As the series kicks off, they meet up with Connor Temple, played by Andrew Lee Potts. He's a student at the university, Central University, I believe it's called, where Cutter is a lecturer, and he gets involved in their first exploits in the Forest of Dean, where strange lizard creatures have emerged and are causing chaos in the area. It's a very punchy and powerful and amusing first episode, and it really sets up the scenario of the show, what it's going to be about. And it also sets up mysteries which, in possibly a longer series, would have had more time to develop. I think the problem I had with the whole series in terms of its narrative arcs is that they were resolved and moved forward far too quickly. The mystery of Helen, Nick's missing wife, is resolved very quickly. In fact, in the third episode, and we discover that she travelled back into the Permian in the past and has been living there for several years and surviving in a hostile environment. But we discover that in the third episode, and she then is threaded throughout the rest of the series. And there are other things that could have been teased out and could have been extended. But I suppose with only 6 episodes, and with the show not having a guarantee of a second series, it was necessary to move story elements along rather than extend them in the way that Doctor Who did. Doctor Who had 13 episodes and was able to seed things at the beginning of the series which would come to fruition at the end of the series. I'm thinking of Bad Wolf in the first series and Torchwood in the second series, Mr. Saxon in the third, and so on. You had 13 episodes to let these things grow, but Primeval with 6 episodes just had to get on with it. And it all feels a little bit fast-paced and a little bit exhausting in a way, because you don't have time to sit and digest what you've seen, because the next plot development is happening and the things are moving forward at such a pace. Having said that, it's a very accomplished first episode that sets things up very nicely and sets up the character dynamics and sets up the arcs and sets up the format. One of the problems of this series, I think, is that having established that prehistoric creatures and all sorts of oogie booglies can travel back through these anomalies, we don't get to see anything incredibly interesting in the first series. I think what we really wanted, what anybody would wanted in a series like this, some dinosaurs, proper dinosaurs. We want a T-Rex, we want a Stegosaurus, some raptors, a Brontosaurus would do. But we don't get any of those really in this series. We get some of them a little bit later on in the show, and it continues into later seasons. But I think my main issue with the first series is that the monsters are a bit dreary, really. There's nothing hugely exciting about them. In the second episode, we have a great idea for a story which is thrown away because it doesn't develop it enough. There's an infestation of prehistoric spider creatures and this huge poisonous caterpillar thing on the London Underground, but we don't really see enough of that sort of thing. We get a scene at the beginning of the episode where people are on an underground train and a creature appears and a girl starts screaming at it, and then somebody who works in the underground is attacked later on. But we don't get to see any real terror. We don't get to see any panic. We don't get to see people screaming because there are monsters around. It's all quite contained. So we get lots of stuff in the underground tunnel. We don't get a real sense of potential terror because these things are all quite self-contained, and the only contact that they have with any human beings are Cutter and his team, who also include a military force who are sort of following in their wake, these black-clad soldiers who are led by Captain Tom Ryan, played by Mark Wakeling. The third episode starts off quite promisingly, and in fact is one of the slightly edgier episodes of the series. In fact, it starts off in a swimming pool where a man and his girlfriend are having a late night swim. He jumps off a top diving board and a mosasaur leaps out from the water and swallows him. You'll remember the mosasaur, of course, from Jurassic World, and it's actually quite a similar scene of the thing rising up out of the water and devouring this guy. It then goes on to move into a storyline about this creature infesting a nearby reservoir and possibly getting into the water supply and so on. But again, it's very underpopulated. We don't see people running and screaming. We don't see that sort of visceral street terror that you want from a series about dinosaurs and monsters appearing in the modern world. It's very underpopulated, and I do find that sort of thing quite frustrating. It's one of the issues I had with the recent Fantastic Four film, that it's all about the main characters. You don't really see anybody else. But it's quite an interesting episode because it's one of the things about the series that it goes a little bit further than Doctor Who does in terms of what it shows and what it suggests. Well, there's not blood gouting all over the place, but you do see the effects of these creature attacks. And one of the criticisms I've always had about modern Doctor Who is this: we shall never show blood. We'll never show the effects of guns and things. And I do think that that's a misguided policy, because if you're showing violent things happening to people in a series with a potentially young audience tuning in, I think you do need to show the consequences of violence. People just fall over if they're shot, or they fly through the air and bang into a wall and they collapse on the floor. You need to show that there is some physical result of all. I'm not saying you want smears of blood all over the walls and blood gouting out of people's heads. I think you need to show that if terrible things are happening to people, if they're involved in violent situations, then violent things happen to them. You need to show a bit of the real physical consequences, and Primeval doesn't shy away from that. In this particular third episode, you get a scene where they discover the digested and regurgitated remains of the swimmer from the first sequence. And it is this sort of massive gore and guns. It's quite nasty. It's as nasty as the show ever really goes. You get other scenes of people being swooped up. There's an episode that involves a pteranodon attacking a golf course, and you see somebody being swept up, and you see one sort of a bloodied foot, which is all that's left of him after he's been swallowed up by this creature. The show isn't afraid to go a little bit further than Doctor Who does, and I think that's to its credit. It also goes a little bit further than Doctor Who, I think, in terms of its audience. Now, this is aimed at the same audience of Doctor Who, presumably. It was shown in a similar time slot, but it seems to deal with issues and unafraid to deal with things that you wouldn't expect in a show that was aimed at children or had a potential child audience. Doctor Who, of course, had all the romantic stuff between the Doctor and Rose. You had Captain Jack, who would flirt with anybody. It dealt with those sorts of things in a slightly carefree, cheeky fashion. Primeval is a bit more upfront. You've got relationship stuff going on here. You've got Nick and his wife. They're estranged because she's been trapped in the past. They come back together again. He is, in turn, attracted to Claudia Brown, played by Lucy Brown. She's the Home Office liaison officer who works with Cutter and Ben Miller, who plays the head of the Home Office organisation responsible for investigating the anomalies. And they have an attraction towards one another. You have attraction between Hannah Spirit's character. She plays Abby Maitland. She is clearly fancies James Murray's character, but she doesn't know if he fancies her. And Connor Temple, played by Andrew Lee Potts, he fancies Abby Maitland. So there's all this sort of stuff going along. There are certain risque references here and there. And of course, there are 3 episodes where Abby Maitland wanders around in her pants for no apparent reason. She's in her flat. I think the explanation for it is that she's looking after a lizard for the first episode that she smuggled home. She wants to look after it. She calls it Rex. And the temperature, she has to put the thermostat up, so it's very hot, which means she has to walk around in her pants quite a lot. Talking about Abby Maitland, she's played by Hannah Spirit from S Club. And it's hard not to think that she was cast hoping that she would do a Billie Piper, because Billie Piper had exploded onto Doctor Who and was massively acclaimed for her performance as Rose Tyler almost immediately. The same didn't happen for Hannah Spearer. Now, she openly admitted sometime afterwards that she only auditioned for the role because she'd done a bit of acting, but she wasn't an actress as such. She auditioned for the role because of Billie Piper. She felt, well, an ex-pop star can do that, perhaps I can. And I'm sure that was part of the thinking in casting her for the role. But she ain't no Billie Piper. She gives a decent performance, but there's no thrust or depth to her performance or the character, really. And I think that's probably the issue that she had. The writing generally for the characters, whilst it deals with the relationshipy stuff and it's sort of a bit more adult than perhaps Doctor Who was at the time, it's still a little bit feeble in many ways. The scripts are sort of surface level in what they do with the characters. But I think it's interesting that they do this sort of stuff. And I was quite invested watching these 6 episodes across 4 or 5 days. And I did get to know and quite like the characters. Connor Temple, played by Andrew Lee Potts, he is slightly irritating. I think that they created this character who's supposed to be slightly nerdy, but they fell into all the stereotypes. His slightly geeky friends, and they have, they're talking about their nights doing Blake 7 and Battlestar Galactica binges and playing computer games and all these sorts of things. It is a stereotype of the nerd of the early 21st century, I think. And he's a little bit tiresome in places. He's trying to be the Joker, and he obviously fancies Abby. And there's a bit of will they, won't they, and later on they do, because they do become a couple in real life and in the series. It's all quite lightweight, but it's unusual for a show of this type to go that way. You would think they just wanted to focus on the monsters and the science fiction aspect of the series. The disappointment then is that we don't have dinosaurs. We have dodos, albeit dodos infested with parasites. We have the mosasaur. In the last episode, we have the future predators. As the show broadens its concept slightly, we discover that the anomalies are actually gateways to the future as well, and these evolved predator-type creatures who are, I think they're described in the last episode, as a bit like giant apes or great apes. And they are a recurring feature throughout the rest of the series. In terms of how the show looks, I think the visuals, I watched it on DVD, the visuals are okay. The show had a budget of £1 million per episode, so it was fairly expensive by the standards of ITV dramas of the time, particularly as they didn't do this sort of thing. So effects and all that sort of stuff obviously increased the budget. And I think that most of the time they're quite well done. They certainly manage those scenes where they're interacting with things, knocking things over and flying about. That's done very well. But I don't think there's a depth to them. I don't think there's a detail that you would get these days from this sort of effect. Sometimes they look a bit inconsistent and they look a bit intangible. They don't have a reality about them. What I'm basically saying is they don't look particularly real. They do the job though. Some are better than others. I think that the episode, I think it's episode 5, again, which takes place in a deserted building. There's this huge mansion that they go to, and it's attacked by sort of baby pterosaur type creatures, and it's sort of reminiscent of Hitchcock's The Birds in a way. You've got these flocks of these deadly carnivorous birds flocking down a chimney and crashing through windows. But the whole building's deserted. There's nobody there except Cutter and his team. And you sort of think, I just want to see some more people being chased and attacked. It just feels so denuded of other people. But overall, I think the effects for a 2007 series are pretty good. The anomaly itself is an odd one. It's this thing which appears anywhere underwater, in the sky, on the ground, and it's a bit like a broken mirror. There's like shards of glass that are floating through the air, and characters sort of step through it. They sort of disappear into this thing and reappear elsewhere. To be fair, a lot of it is filmed outside. There's a lot of action and movement going on. There's some sequences filmed in Lanzarote to give the idea of sort of prehistoric landscapes. So it looks quite big. And I will say, to its credit, whilst the scripts aren't always as sharp as they should be, and it does tend to fall into a rut of creatures arrive through the anomalies, let's get them back, and they chase them back in again. I noticed this particularly, I think in the second series from my memory, that this did get to be a bit of a formula. There's a creature loose, let's get it back in. First series does have other things going on, so it's not just that. It varies things a little bit. And I will say it's directed by Cilla Ware and Jamie Payne, neither of whom had much experience of this sort of drama, because let's face it, there wasn't much of this sort of drama on British television at this time. But they did a really good job in giving this a real pace and energy. It's directed really energetically and with a real sense of urgency, with lots of zoom cuts and sharp cuts and close-ups, and it really moves and it really keeps the energy levels going. So all in all, I have to say I did enjoy watching the first series of Primeval again, and it is one of those shows that I think, as I said, if you watched it at the time, you wouldn't necessarily think I need to watch it again. But having not seen it for all these years and looking for something that was sort of easy to watch while I was sniffling and sneezing, it was very enjoyable, and I felt that there were some good performances. I think Douglas Henshall, it's funny watching his performance, whether it's something in the character, whether it's him, but he does sort of have some humour in his reactions. There's lots of shots where he's laughing and smiling at things that are going on, and it's quite a nice performance. And he has some nice dramatic sequences with his wife Helen, played by Juliette Aubrey, and you can see the chemistry with him and the character of Claudia. And there is, I have to say, there is a terrific cliffhanger ending at the end of the first series, where there's been issues about Helen. He's discovered that she actually had an affair as a lecturer with Stephen, who was a student, which is a massive betrayal for Nick, because Stephen has been his right-hand man for so many years. And he has gone back into the past with Helen, then he comes back again, and it appears that Claudia doesn't exist and has never existed, and that something has gone horribly wrong in the timeline. And that's as far as I've gone with Primeval. I've watched the first series, and I might well watch the second series. The show was pretty successful in its first run. It kicked off with 7 million viewers. That sort of dipped, but it stayed around the 6 million. And it carried on for 2 more successful series on ITV. The character of Claudia reappeared as Jenny Brown in the next series, played by the same actress. But apparently, as I was reading about the show last night, this was never resolved. What had actually happened? What had caused Claudia to disappear, to be replaced by a doppelganger with a similar name? The show's production was sort of troubled in some ways. In the second season, Douglas Henshall became a bit disillusioned with the show. He felt that the scripts had become a little bit formulaic and didn't have the inventiveness and complexity of the first run, and he wanted to bail out. Now, it was planned that he would run to the end of the third series, when he and his wife Helen would be stranded in the past, but he wanted to get out of the series as quickly as possible in the third run, so he was written out, killed off, I think, in the third episode. This disrupted all the plans that they had in terms of the character and where it was going to go. The resolution of what happened to Jenny and Claudia fell by the wayside. New characters came in, and the rest of the show's run was a little bit choppy because characters kept coming and going. Jason Fleming came in for one series to be a new hero figure, and then he left, and other characters came in. The show did stagger on for 5 full series. Now, at the end of its third series, ITV axed it because it was very expensive to make. They were having some financial problems at the time, and it was axed. It was recommissioned a few months later when Impossible Pictures went into a new co-production deal with ITV and Watch, the digital channel, which no longer exists because presumably not enough people watched it. And 13 more episodes of Primeval were made. Again, there were various cast changes, split into 2 seasons, 7 episodes and 6 episodes. The first of those seasons aired on ITV first before being screened on Watched, and the ratings had dropped fairly significantly. A couple of million had walked away from the series. The 5th series of 6 episodes aired on Watch first and then arrived on ITV, where the viewing figures plunged fairly disastrously to under 2 million, and the show was summarily cancelled. It lived on, however, as a Canadian series a few years later called Primeval New World, which did feature some links to the British series, and Andrew Lee Potts appeared in a couple of episodes, but it was fairly independent of the original series, and that too, unfortunately, fell by the wayside after one 13-part series. So that is the history of Primeval. I do think the show was at its best in its first season. I will probably go on to watch season 2 just to see how it develops. It is a shame that I know that certain things that are set up which aren't resolved properly, and there's certain character beats that don't go anywhere. But certainly I think in terms of the first series, that's worth tracking down and taking a look at. It was a brave effort by ITV to do something in the vein of Doctor Who. And whilst it didn't always work, the first series was extremely watchable. I flew through the episodes. They were never boring because of the way they were directed. I thought the writing was fairly accomplished within the confines of the audience they were aiming for and what they felt they were able to do. And the cast is really very good. I think Douglas Henschel had a real charisma about him, and I think it is a shame he bailed out of the show because he gave it a real weight. The supporting cast was pretty good as well. I mean, Hannah Spearrett's performance is what it is. Andrew Lee Potts is very lively and gives a lot of comedy value to the show. James Murray's character is the action figure, if you like. And in a way, I think Douglas Henschel as the Doctor, you've got the other characters who are the Doctor's companions. And the series does have a sort of John Pertwee era vibe because you've got the soldiers, the unit-type soldiers. You've got various other characters circulating around Cutter's orbit. So it does have a quite a nice, warm 1970s Doctor Who feel about it. It's never as good, it's never as clever and imaginative as 1970s Doctor Who. But I think for an ITV science fiction effort, and God knows we don't get many of them, I think this was actually rather good. The first series is very well recommended. You take your own chances with the rest of the show. I will probably, as I said, try season 2, but I won't go any deeper than that because I remember getting frustrated by the new characters coming in and then disappearing very quickly. But it's good fun for the first series. If you want to find it, it's not on any streaming service that I could find at the moment. I thought it was on ITVX, but apparently not. But it is still available on DVD, and to be honest, if you wander around a few charity shops, you'll probably find copies of most of it on the shelves. It is one of those shows that seems to have been surrendered to charity shops over the last few years. So that's Primeval then, season 1, which I really enjoyed, I have to say. It was good fun, and watching it, you sort of think, if only it had been just a little bit better, a bit more imaginative, a bit more out there. I think it played it safe, perhaps more often than it should have done, despite its various cast changes and format changes. It never quite reached for the sky. Primeval then, a show that, a bit like the dinosaurs and creatures that populated it, time has forgotten and people have forgotten. It's just slipped out of people's memories. It left no cultural footprint, which is odd because that particular period, the first 10 or so years of the 21st century, there was a bit of a resurgence on British TV of this sort of show led by Doctor Who. But Primeval just has not been remembered. You never hear people talking about their favourite episodes. There's no buzz on the internet about it. I dare say there are forums and people chatting about it passionately, but it's slipped between the cracks. And I think that's a shame because it doesn't deserve to, because it was a good, fun show with a decent budget, a stomping theme tune, by the way, which I should have mentioned earlier, and a good cast working really hard to deliver some exciting TV, and we don't get a lot of that. Oh, for this sort of thing on TV in this country these days. But, you know, we're in a different world again now. It's the sort of show as well that in another world would have had a comic strip incarnation. You could imagine it in Looking with art by Mike Noble or something, or TV Actual and those sort of comics. It's in its DNA to be a comic strip. There were some books, of course, the series came out on DVD, but it's just disappeared. So I'm glad to have revisited it and reacquainted myself with it. No, it's not a fantastic show. No, it's not a classic of the genre. If you've never seen it and you like some monster action, then it's worth a look. And if you did see it and have very cruelly forgotten it, go on, give it a go. You might find it's a lot better than you remembered. Right, thank you for watching. Hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel by clicking there or there with your phone, and you'll be part of my stuff world of stuff. Right, I'm out of here. I will see you soon. Lots more stuff to come. Until I see you, keep taking the stuff. Was that okay? Bit rusty? Yeah, I suppose so.